Good evening. I am going to go ahead and start the meeting for tonight's Planning Commission. It is June 9th, 2010. I am, as you can see, Chairman Bourgeois is out of town today with an excused absence, and as Vice Chair, I'll be sitting in. A couple of logistics before we get started. First is I do want to remind everyone in the audience that if you have a cell phone, if you could silence it, or any other device that may beep and interrupt tonight's proceedings. The second is that all the material that we have in front of us is available to the public and should be available out in the lobby. So if you need a copy of the agenda or any of the documentation, please feel free to grab that. And the third is that if you do plan on speaking tonight, we do require a speaker card from you. Looks like this. It'll be behind the chamber benches, and we do need that as part of the written record. Okay? And with that, I'll go ahead and ask staff to provide the roll call.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
Commissioner Erickson?
Here.
Commissioner Tausfor?
Here.
And Vice Chair Sayoc?
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Jensen, Commissioner Machici, and Chair Bourgeois is not present.
And just to confirm, we do have a quorum tonight.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, and if you can all stand and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to begin with approval of the minutes from our last meeting, May 26, 2010. Does anyone have any items or concerns? And if not, I'm looking for a motion.
I'll move the approval.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Okay, it passes 4-0. Okay. Written communications. Staff, do we have any written communications for today?
We have one desk item.
Commissioners, it is pertaining to item 2, so I'll give you a chance to look at it between agenda items 1 and 2. Okay. And then requested continuances, we have none tonight. And I move now to subcommittee reports. A quick note, whenever we do hear that buzz, we've been told that it's because of cell phones that are in close proximity to the microphone. So if you do plan on speaking, we ask that you turn off your cell phone or just don't bring it up with you. And if any of our commissioners up front have not turned off their phones yet, if you could do so.
Sorry.
No problem. Okay, so we were just at subcommittee reports. Do I have any commissioners that have anything to report since our last meeting? Commissioner?
There was a Historic Preservation Committee meeting last Wednesday, at which time the committee signed off on the exterior remodeling proposal for the Coggeshall, is that how you pronounce that? Mansion, I think, right?
Okay, and then do we have one for CDAC?
We do have one for CDAC. And today we met at 4:30, and with the project was, if I can remember, is the at the corner of Los Gatos, Almaden Boulevard and Los Gatos Boulevard. And it was the not an application, but a proposal in front of us looking at a CVS drugstore developing the Chevrolet property. It was a very interesting meeting, and we all gave our input, and I think they went away with a lot of information about community compatibility, architecture that they probably hadn't considered, and I thought it was a very fruitful meeting. Take any questions.
Okay. Okay, thank you for those subcommittee reports. We now move towards verbal communications. This is the opportunity for the audience to speak on any item that is not on our agenda. We have 2 tonight, and so again, if you have anything to say that's not regarding item agenda number 1 or 2. Okay, so I don't have any cards for that, so we'll go ahead and move straight to our consent calendar. So consent calendar, this is, we have one item on our consent. It's at 218 North Santa Cruz. This is an opportunity. We usually act on this in one motion, but I look to my commissioners first to see if there's anyone who'd like to pull this off consent. If not, I'm looking at the audience, if anyone. Okay, so I'm looking for a motion then on item number 1. Commissioner Telesfori?
I would like to approve on consent calendar number 1, 218 North Santa Cruz, conditional use permit U-10-010, requesting approval to establish a formula retail store on property zone C2, APN 529-04-086. The title is Title IX Sports Incorporated.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Erickson. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, it passes 5-0.
This decision is appealable to the town council. There's a 10-day appeal period. There is a fee for filing appeal, and the forms are available in the town clerk's office.
Okay, so we are now at new public hearings. It is at property located at 15928 Union Avenue, subdivision application M-08-13, architecture and site applications S-08-30, I believe. Oh, -30, -33, and -34, and negative declaration ND-09-02. What I'd like is, I'm going to ask staff to provide a staff report, and then after that, I will ask our town attorney to provide some legal counsel on how to proceed, given that we have several applications bundled together with this project. Okay. Oh, and yes, would anyone like 1 or 2 minutes to review the desk item before? Okay, so staff?
Before I turn over to Ms. Davis to give the report, I wanted to let the commissioners and the public know that we have a new timer. And so if you're not used to if you are used to the timer, it will be different. It's louder, and it's my understanding that 30 seconds prior to the end of your presentation, it will give you a buzz just to let you know you only have 30 seconds left. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And Ms. Davis will do the report.
The desk item in front of you this evening has a couple pieces of information that I wanted to comment on. We had 2 project data sheets attached to the staff report. One of them had incorrect numbers on floor area for the proposed residence, and that was for parcel 2, and then the other one was missing some data. So those 2 parcel data information sheets are corrected and much more detailed for you on the desk item. We also had included a table in the neighborhood compatibility section of the staff report, and the numbers cited for proposed parcels 2 and 3 were the maximum allowable numbers for the houses and garages. And so the only thing that's different is we've put the proposed numbers for the houses and garages because they are less than the maximum numbers. In addition, one of the Planning Commission members asked for the Planning Commission minutes of August 26, 2009, which was the last time the Commission saw this proposal, and that has been provided just for informational purposes and background. I also wanted to note that staff met with neighbors this morning to discuss some concerns about drainage, and we do have a couple of additional conditions that we would recommend adding if the decision is to approve the tentative map, and I'll mention those at the end when I talk about the decision process and what you have to do to approve the project. So the subject property is located on the east side of Union Avenue. It's just north of Blossom Hill Road. The Leawood Court project is immediately to the south of this property. The property has frontage on Union Avenue, and Panorama Way ends at the north property line at the rear of the property. Currently, the property is 40,579 square feet. Right-of-way grants would be required if the subdivision is approved for frontage improvements on Union and completion of a cul-de-sac on Panorama, and that would take the property down to 32,900 square feet. The site's currently occupied by a single-family residence and garage. The applicant is proposing to remove both those structures. An architecture and site application is required to demolish the existing residence, There is a tentative map application to subdivide the property into 3 lots. And we also have a subsequent addition of 2 architecture and site applications for proposed homes on proposed parcels 2 and 3. Parcel 1 would be accessed from Union, parcels 2 and 3 would be accessed from Panorama Way. This has a long history, as you all know. The prior proposal for a 4-lot subdivision was denied by the Planning Commission in June of 2008. The applicant then came in with a new application for 3 lots. The Commission first considered that in February of 2009. At that time, the application was continued for environmental analysis and provision of additional information on the cul-de-sac. One of the aspects of this proposed subdivision is the applicant is requesting a reduced right-of-way. The cul-de-sac paved area would be the same as required by any other cul-de-sac. It's the same as the cul-de-sac on Leawood and Lassoon Courts, which are both in the immediate area. The right-of-way would simply be smaller. And that is something the Commission has the discretion to approve as part of the town code. There is a provision to modify the right-of-way if you determine it's appropriate to do so based on the particular characteristics of the property and the proposed project. The initial study and mitigated negative declaration were completed in 2009. The public comment period for those documents ended in August of 2009. The project came back to the Planning Commission on August 26th of 2009. The Commission unanimously denied the subdivision at that time. The issues of neighborhood compatibility were cited, and also the Commission felt the project is inconsistent with 2 state subdivision map act findings, that the site was not suitable for proposed development, and the site was not suitable for proposed density. The applicant appealed the decision, and it was heard by Town Council in November of 2009. Council decided to reconsider the matter. They initially denied the application at that November meeting, then had a discussion on whether they should reconsider it. That took place on February 1st of 2010. The council remanded this application to the Planning Commission, the tentative map, and the companion architecture and site application for demolition of the residence. And since that time, the applicant decided to move forward with the house plans for parcels 2 and 3, and those 2 applications were added to the package. There are a number of neighborhood concerns. Those are neighborhood compatibility in terms of the lot pattern, house size and height, loss of views of the hillside, visual impact, privacy, traffic and safety on Panorama Way, and drainage. If the Planning Commission decides to approve the application, there are a number of steps you need to take. Those involve first acting on the environmental documents. There's a negative declaration, and you have to adopt a mitigation monitoring plan if you're going to approve. There are required findings for demolition of the single-family residence, and then you'd have to determine that none of the state subdivision map act findings can be made. The architecture and site applications for the 2 homes are independent applications. They do not have to be acted on concurrent with the tentative map. You could potentially approve the tentative map and not approve the other 2 applications if you felt further review or work was needed to do to the designs. The A&S applications could be approved or continued for redesign, and they can be acted on independent of one another. So you could potentially approve one, not approve one, continue both, approve both. If the tentative map application is denied, you should deny all the architecture and site applications along with it. And the 2 conditions that staff is recommending be added if the decision is for approval are relative to drainage, and they would be added under the engineering conditions. One is that storm drainage treatment shall utilize retention rather than infiltration or other methods. And the other is any driveway along the north property line shall have a curb on its northern edge to minimize runoff towards neighboring properties. And that concludes staff's report, and I'm available if you have any questions. And also we have our engineer, John Gaylord, present.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Before I open this up for my commissioners for questions of staff, I do want to ask the town attorney, when this came before us, it was just the subdivision application. And what we have now is a different iteration of the subdivision, as well as architecture for parcels 2 and 3. So the specific question I have is, can any of the details from the architecture be used and incorporated when we make deliberations about the actual subdivision of the lands?
They can be and they should be if you determine that it's important to the way the subdivision is designed. Under the MAP Act, you're charged and you have the authority to determine the design and improvement of the subdivision. While you could take a very narrow view and limit that to the roads and the width of the roads and turnarounds and driveways, oftentimes in certain environments you'll find that the way the house is designed is as important as anything else, meaning how it fits into the flora and the fauna and the hillsides, and whether it's stark and modern or fits in with the neighborhood. So I've never found a really good dividing point. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely you can, and the reason I say it's important that you should, if you determine that you're going to improve the map in whatever configuration, and critical parts of the architectural design is important, that permit should be tied into the map, because the map's permanent, the A&S is not. In other words, you can let the A&S lapse, but if you record the map, that's permanent. Now it's subdivided, and in order to have those concerns you had in the A&S apply to the map, you need to incorporate the conditions.
Okay, thank you. That helps tremendously. Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I want to follow up on that question. Had the applicant not sought ASA approval tonight, and we simply had a request for a subdivision into 3 lots, we wouldn't have the design. And we would be asked to approve whether we could not make one of the findings that are required. In that event, that's why I get a bit confused here. In other words, if somebody doesn't ask for ASA approval, you don't know what they're going to build. And you're saying, fine, you can divide it into 2 lots, 3 lots, whatever it is, for residential purposes. But because tonight we're also doing ASA, if we were, for example, to say, we don't like the design, I hear you saying, and therefore, we might be able to come up with one of the findings that are, if you make, under the MAP Act, would say you declined, you moved to deny the subdivision map. I find that, and I think that's what you told us, and I think that also is my understanding, but I find that odd, because if somebody plays the game, they don't seek architectural site approval tonight. They merely seek subdivision map approval, and they come back later with ASA. Now, if we're not satisfied with the ASA, they also don't get the map approved, and I find that confusing to me. It may exactly be the law, and I'm asking you if that is the case.
Well, let me try to clear up the confusion, because I've seen this commission, in the short time I've been with you, have a concern about the ultimate design of the architectural and site plan. And in fact, in one case, one subdivision, I think said, I'm going to go ahead with the subdivision and approve that, but can we have the A&S come back to the commission? So you could tie in that concern. You can also include conditions in the map if you don't have A&S to say particular attention should be taken to make sure that the roof heights do not exceed that of the neighbors, or the canopies of the trees aren't cut back. So you can do it a variety of different ways. I don't think they're ever intentionally disconnected, especially if the commission weighs in on it. But I have seen the commission and the council do that.
Well, in reviewing the town council's minutes, I noticed that Councilman Krasinski made some fairly interesting comments, one of which was, that ought to be covered at architectural site approval. I think he was the only one that said that, but he did say it, and it sounds like he was right at that time. But now we're saying, because, and it doesn't say on the report we have, it's been modified because we were told tonight we have ASA before us too. If you read the report you gave us earlier, it doesn't have anything about ASA in it. All the facts are there, but it didn't say, and you're seeking ASA tonight. So I want this to be clear, because I know that Councilman Krasinski said, I want the Planning Commission to be crystal clear on what they're doing. And as I understand it now, and just so we can proceed the same way, because we have the 2 architectural site approvals before us, it sounds like we can consider that when we're trying to decide whether a finding might be made under the Subdivision Map Act, which would cause the denial. So I think that's what you've just told us, and I'd like to start if that's a clear understanding. Thank you.
Commissioner Jensen?
Yet another follow-up to that, with a slightly different angle. If I understand your response, we can, and I think you argue should, take into consideration the architecture and site applications that have been put before us in deciding on whether there ought to be a 3-lot subdivision. Since we only have 2 architecture and site applications, how can we move forward deciding on a subdivision map act for 3 lots if we only have 2 designs in front of us and you're telling us that all of the designs are something we should take into consideration?
Well, and I didn't mean that you should take into consideration. I think the question was, can you? And my answer was yes. And if you think it's important, you should tie the 2 together. Not having one is not fatal. As I've said in the past, the Commission and the Council have said they have a concern. So it could be that you're concerned about the one you don't have an ANS for, and you say, and when that comes in, can we see that to make sure it's consistent? Or you condition it so it's consistent. I think what the staff report says is the applicant has indicated an interest in a 1-story there. If that's important to your decision-making on a 3-lot subdivision, then you should add that into the conditions.
Can part of our consideration be the absence of a design?
Absence of design in what sense?
Can part of our consideration in deciding whether or not this is appropriate for a 3-lot subdivision be the absence of an architecture and site for one of those 3 lots?
If that's critical to your decision-making, in other words, if you drew the conclusion that you could not find a way to support 3 lots without knowing precisely what's going to go in that 3rd lot, then yes.
Commissioner Telesfor, it looks like you have a
Yeah,
question.
I have a question, but I don't, so as another follow-up to that, could we include in that decision, I don't know how you do this, but with ANS direction for future ANS on that 3rd lot, if that's what would be approved tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
Or follow-up. It has been my experience, certainly on this planning commission, that we've had a number of subdivision map acts before us that had no ASA. And they were approved or weren't approved based on what we had before us. You're correct that we could condition them, but I don't ever remember a situation where we felt that the absence, I mean, it's not a condition precedent that one must file an ASA app to get a subdivision map approved. We have this unusual, somewhat unusual circumstance that we do have 2 architectural site approvals with us tonight. And because of that, we apparently can tie those together. But the absence of an architectural site approval for one of the lots, I wouldn't think is a deficiency for the consideration of the subdivision map. If, on the other hand, one believes because of the uniqueness of the lot or whatever, we want to condition that, or we want to see it when it comes back. I think we've done that before. But I think it is important that we clarify there is no requirement in law that to get a subdivision map approved, you have to submit essentially plans for what you intend to build there. Isn't that correct?
Well, just so you know, what's out there in the world is it's done 3 different ways. There is, first city I work for, you cannot bring a subdivision map without a complete development application, right down to the color of the window mullions. Other cities, they care nothing about the map. All their streets are shown on their general plan or on a specific plan or in a zoning map, and they only care about the permit. And if you spend the money on the permit, right down to the color of the window mullions, then you can come back in next week, get your map. And the 3rd way is you do the map first, you bring the architectural later. So that's the 3 ways it's done. They're all legal.
Commissioner Jensen?
Just to keep beating a dead horse. As I understood your answer to me previously, if in my discretion as a commissioner in listening to the testimony and reviewing the materials, I believe it's critical to my decision to have the plans for the first parcel 1 in determining whether 3 lots are appropriate, I can take that into consideration. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Commissioner
Right. Just to clarify, I wasn't wanting to condition anything at this point on Lot 1. It was mostly, I asked if we could give direction for A and S, not a condition of. So just wanted to clarify that.
Commissioner Jensen.
Now I have a completely different legal question. And I realize that this no doubt is not within our purview. However, just out of curiosity, looking at the Town Code Section 29.20.300, which defines the reasons that the Town Council, the standards they use in reviewing appeals to the Planning Commission. As I read the transcript from the council meeting, it appeared that the motion to remand it to us was based on new information, and the new information was the new design. And just in looking at that code section, if the decision to return it to us is based on new information, then the new information has to have been something that was not readily and reasonably available for submission to the commission. Not readily or reasonable available for submission. So I'm just wondering, if just as a legal matter, how do we get over the fact that this has been pending since 2008 and come to the decision legally that a new design was not readily and reasonably available for submission to the commission?
Well, and my take on it is it's probably not even subject to that strict of a reading, in the sense that what really happened was the council had never really finished its work on this. So in other words, they never adopted a resolution, so it wasn't a finished decision. Usually when you have a motion for reconsideration, it's a final decision you're reconsidering. This was a little bit of both. But they made that determination in their infinite wisdom that there was new information they weren't aware of. So that's why they referred it. So I don't think it's held up to a kind of a black and white, you meet it or you don't test.
Do we have any other questions of staff? Okay. Just by way of background, as you know, this has been remanded to us by the town council, and there's going to be a little bit more leeway that I am going to have of my commissioners asking these detailed questions, because one of the things, if you read the transcripts, is that the request is that we be crystal clear and that there may not have been a better understanding in our last decision-making. And so I just want to make sure that everyone understands we're all on the same page and that there are no ambiguity as we move forward with the rest of this hearing. Okay? Now, with that, I will begin the public portion. The applicant will have 5 minutes. All those that wish to speak will have 3 minutes. I do have several, at least one card that is relinquishing time to someone else. We do have several speaker cards, so I do ask everyone has an opportunity to speak, but if there are points that have been raised by someone previous to you, that you just mention that and move on to the others, just so that we can be somewhat expedient with our time tonight. Okay? So with that, I believe, Tony Jeans, will you be speaking as the applicant? Okay. You have 5 minutes.
No. Wait, rebuttal. Tony Jeans, 170 Station Street, Los Gatos. Commissioners, I want to just go through a couple of things. The top plan that you see there is what was submitted last time. So the heavy lines show the houses 2 and 3 as they were originally proposed, with a shared driveway running along the property line. That you determined was incompatible with the layout of the lots, and it was too much like a flag lot to pass muster. Planning staff said that it did meet all the rules and regulations, but it was just. We also, when we were looking at different ways of laying out between the town council meeting and this meeting, looked at other options. We considered an orthogonal line dividing this property in 2 portions and putting 2 houses side by side We didn't like that because if it did meet all the other rules and regulations, we felt that the houses would be too boxy, they'd be big squares, and would not be compatible from the architecture and site standpoint. So what we were looking for was something that was a little better. What we have come to you with is a proposal which you can look at in two ways. It's based on a pie configuration where you divide around the cul-de-sac just like any cul-de-sac would be divided. It doesn't have a flag lot impact. It doesn't look like one. But we'd actually like you to approve one with a slightly modified property line at the bottom and at the back because it gives better backyards for the homes. And we'd also been able to widen the frontage from 30 feet to 35 feet, gives a little bit more frontage on panorama. Apart from that, the houses are identical, the sizes, there are no changes whatsoever. The only issue is this mythical line that is the property line. What it does do, however, is it changes the FAR because the lot size change a little bit. So when you're looking at the FARs, you have to look at TM1 or TM2, but we would really like you to approve TM2, the one at the top. It does meet all the zoning guidelines. It aligns the houses around the cul-de-sac. It separates, in fact, they both do, the houses on the northern property line from these houses, so there's no direct view impact looking out of the houses. I'm going to put this up very briefly, and we can discuss it later. I have 10 sets of conditions for proposals for inclusion as conditions for the project, which will benefit the neighbors. This is after talking with them and then gleaning what I think they would like to see. I'll give you each one, and if you like those conditions, or any of them, or none of them, you can either approve them or not, but they're really for the neighbors' benefits. So that's all I'm going to say about the map. I'm now going to talk a little bit about A&S because I only have 5 minutes total. So what we're looking here, this is actually a rendering from Mr. Mitchell's house across the street. This is what he would be looking at when the cul-de-sac is complete. We have parcel 2 and parcel 3. Parcel 3 is a Craftsman. Parcel 2 is more a cottage style, and we've picked a very unique style because we're trying to reduce the mass on the house on the right to have as little impact on the neighbors as possible. Before I get into details on that, I do want to make sure that you understand, because of the errors in the report, we are a total of 230 feet under the floor area ratio on the two houses. The one closest to the neighbors is nearly 200 feet smaller than the other one, as opposed to, and we're about 100 feet over the FAR on both houses, as opposed to half a foot over the FAR for Mr. Mangano's house. I'll talk about massing briefly. I think that's my time. Is that time?
That's 30 seconds more.
Okay, thank you. What I'm trying to show here, I've never really addressed massing mathematically. So what I've tried to do is saying, look, if mass is really considered the amount of direct view that is blocked by a building, then Mr. Mangano's house on the right blocks 1,500 square feet of view. The house, parcel 2, adjacent to it, blocks 1,100 feet. So we've tried to reduce the mass. We've used a lot of techniques that, if you ask me questions, I can get into in detail. But I'm really trying to reduce the mass of that building to have minimal impact on the neighbors, which is why the shadow study shows almost no impact of shadow other than in the extreme equinox, and even then it's only fractionally higher than the fence. I've got this reading out. Do you want me to continue?
You know, I believe that sound was actually, time was up, okay? Bear with us, this is a new system for us as well. Okay, thank you for that. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Mr. Jeans at this time? Okay, okay, was that a question? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I have a number of questions. Where is Tony? I have a number of questions. I'm going to listen to everybody speak first, but I just thought to start, I wanted to begin focusing on something, one of which is the community design element of the general plan. As I understand it, that is something that we can take into consideration now. Ultimately, you've talked about certain bulk and massing and the fact that your zoning is correct and the number of square feet is correct and your FAR is correct. What becomes a little difficult for us, I guess, is there are at least 3 of the general policies of the community design element which are a little bit more nebulous. And let me just mention them. CDP 1.1 says promote and protect the physical and other distinctive qualities of the residential neighborhoods. CDP 1.5 says avoid abrupt changes in scale and density. And CDP 1.7 says new structures, remodels, landscapes, and hardscapes shall be designed to harmonize and blend with the scale and rhythm of the neighborhood and natural features in the area. So I guess if you could, my question to you really is, do you believe you've addressed, and this isn't a trick question, you may want to think about this and come up later. If you've thought about those issues and you want to respond to that now, I would appreciate it. If you want to think about it, that's fine too.
I'll give you an initial response. I only had 5 minutes in which to talk, and I'm not just talking about the tentative map. I'm talking about architecture and site, and so I'm trying to cram everything into one. We absolutely did try to. We looked at the design of the houses, and that has been addressed very thoroughly by the consulting architect, who gave us very good feedback. We modified the design to make sure that they were compatible in terms of architectural design, and we incorporated his changes into the plans, and I think that what you see is basically very pleasing projects. In terms of bulk and mass, I was trying to do that very briefly in showing you that. I'll actually show you down at the bottom. You've got a streetscape. So as you come along Panorama, you've got Mr. Mangano's house, the one on the right, the 2 houses that are going round the cul-de-sac that we are proposing. You have the houses on Leeward beyond, which are at a higher elevation. Mr. Mangano's house is 20.5 feet, 22.5 feet tall, 21.5 feet, 21.5 feet tall. We're just under 24 on this one. We're 24'6" on that one. So we're kind of bridging the gap here, even though these are much taller houses. They're also much higher. But
let me stop you for a second just to focus. I've seen all this and I understand this. What I guess I missed was your most immediate neighbor as you go to Union, I think, is Mrs. Lynette, isn't that?
Lynette, yes.
And I don't recall much discussion about the house which is proposed to be built right next to her lot. So when we look at Mr. Mangani's lot, you've got a full discussion of that, and I understand your discussion. I'm not saying what I agree with, but I understand it. But I couldn't find much discussion on, is it pronounced Lynette or Lynette?
Lynette.
Mrs. Lynette. No, I'm speaking to you about your consideration of that,
okay.
How it's designed to be compatible with her house, for example.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie Lynette's house is actually here. This one is going to be very important, being right next to her house. So that is her back porch, that is her front. So this one, I want to make a one-story house. If you want to condition that to be a one-story house, I've arranged the lot to be such that we can do a nice one-story house here. I've also arranged and I'm suggesting as one of your requirements to me as a condition, is that we keep this Chinese elm tree, which is proposed for removal according to the arborist, but I think we should keep, because both Stephanie Liner and also Mr. Martinez on this side have said, look, that's a great big umbrella tree, can you possibly keep it, even though it was originally proposed for removal? Its condition is fair. I think it's better than fair, honestly. I think it's quite good. So what we've tried to do is, obviously we're not proposing an architectural design for this yet, because, in all honesty, Mr. Grant needs to build those before he can start in on that one. The banks won't lend on 3 at the same time. So this project won't happen for about 2 years' time. So some things may change, some architectural ideas may come up, but it's really my intention that this be a one-story. Stephanie Leinert wanted the garage on this side so that the living space is moved more away from her courtyard. She has a very nice private courtyard in this area here between the back of her house and the shed. And one of the reasons for rotating the lot line at the rear was to ensure that when this house is built, it is impossible to build opposite her patio area, and because the building setback line will allow her a clear view of the hills along there. So we've done a lot of very serious consideration about how we can minimize the impact of Stephanie Liner. Now, this house down here, which you're saying is next to her house, isn't really. It's substantially in front. This just happens to be 200 and something feet.
Where would the story poles be on? I'm looking at your drawing on the top of the page, and I was out there today, and I was looking, standing in her backyard, looking at the story poles. And when I look at the drawing, it doesn't look the same as where the story poles were.
It is. You might have been standing here. They have her house, the little patio with the great big tree. There's a shed, and this is where she spends a lot of time, and it's very important. This is just a big grassy, moderately unkempt area. This is Mr. Mangano's back fence. So what I've tried to do is position this house so I don't impact either of them. And I think we've done a very good job. So in terms of looking at it from the standpoint of Stephanie Liner, yes, absolutely. If she walks around here, or if she looks diagonally, she's looking at the house. But if she looks this way at this beautiful view shed of the hill, she's got a clean shot at it.
Thank you.
Commissioners, do I have any other questions of Mr. Jeans at this point? Commissioner Telesfori?
Just to be perfectly clear, can you just tell us, as a commission, before we hear from anyone else, what specific changes you made since your first presentation?
You mean the one that I made to you?
Whatever it was from your first, second to us, yes, to the Planning Commission, not the, yes. Just so I'm sure about that. And that we can all start from the same page. Yeah, from the last meeting. That would be the first presentation.
So originally, at the meeting where you denied it, 7-0, I think that's the one you mean, we had a house here, and I think Commissioner Machici said if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, then it probably is a duck, and said what you have is a flag lot, even though it doesn't meet the criteria for a flag lot. You felt that it looked like a flag lot. So one of the things that we've done is gone with the conventional pie lot split around the subdivision, which is around the cul-de-sac, which is what you have at every cul-de-sac in Los Gatos, pretty much. So the fundamental thing that we changed with the tentative map was we totally redesigned it. We didn't present to you architecture and site the first time. The neighbors were complaining that they couldn't understand what was going to happen if all they saw was a map and they wanted story poles. We took the gamble, and Mr. Grant spent a lot of money getting houses designed, hopefully to help you in your deliberation, so that you can understand what this subdivision is really going to look like from the panorama standpoint, even though we have not yet designed a single-story house at the back. So really, it was partly to help you with your deliberation, so you can say, we like the idea of a craftsman, we like the cottage style, we think that fits well. So, okay?
So those three things. Okay, thank you.
Okay, do I have any other questions? Okay, Mr. Jeans, we will let the others speak, and then you will have time at the end to answer what other questions we may have, and you may also respond to any of the issues you hear tonight. Okay, let's go ahead and start with Stephanie Lynette. Ms. Lynette, you were mentioned previously, so if you would please come up. And as each speaker comes up, if you could just please state your name and your address so that we have that for the written record.
Stephanie Lynette, 15910 Union Avenue. I'm on the half-acre adjacent to the property line. I am looking for responsible design, compatible design to the neighborhood. The lot is about 210 feet deep. Of that 210 feet deep, about 25 feet goes right to Union Avenue through the town requirement. To say that lot number 2 does not impact me is just unbelievable. I cannot see any sky out of the back end of my house anymore. The green is gone, the trees are gone, the hills are gone. I have to literally bend over to see the sky. Lot number 1, even at 1 story, with the garage that is now represented there, that doesn't even take in the roof. I have got to bend over to see the sky. So the entire back end view from my dining porch, my family room, my bedroom, my kitchen is gone. The side of the house, the 2 bedrooms, the bathroom, it is gone. The 30 feet left I have of the 210 feet on the patio area. Lot 2 blocks the left-hand view. Lot 1 blocks the right-hand view. When the existing house leaves, 3 lots will open up from Leewood looking down. And of that 30 feet, not only the 3 houses and the 2 houses meet approximately midway in the back of my patio. So to say that this doesn't have an impact on me, inside or outside, I find unbelievable. And I want responsible design, compatible design. It may meet density, but intensity, immensity is just, you can't miss it. You can't miss it. There's a rental unit in the back end of the garage. You walk out the front door, it's gone. Everything is gone. Unless you've been there to see that, you may not be able to understand that. So I don't understand, in all due respect, Tony, that this doesn't impact me on lot number 2. And I do feel that lot number 1 does need to be addressed to see even further the impact that it does have on the 210 feet down to 30 feet shared by blocked off twice, 3, and 2 lots. I'm impacted. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Lynette. Does anyone have any questions? Commissioner Jensen.
Ms. Lynette, there was discussion at the town council meeting where this was remanded back to us. A lot of your neighbors, and I think you took the position that 2 lots was appropriate, not 3. You haven't addressed that tonight. Could you address that?
It is compatible to the neighborhood. The neighborhood being Panorama, the neighborhood being Union Avenue. I even know across the street, which isn't even considered part of our neighborhood, it doesn't look like it. It is a 1-story house because of being on Union Avenue. I look at the lots of Panorama and Union as kind of like being ice cube trays, and these are the last 2 slots on the tray. And be harmonious, be in sync. With this monolithic cube of stucco all of a sudden out of the middle of nowhere.
You talked about just now 1-story versus 2-story. What I was addressing was 3 lots versus 2 lots. So 3 houses versus 2 houses.
What is compatible to the neighborhood is 2 lots.
Okay.
And we are a single-story neighborhood.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Ms. Lynette. Before I call the next speaker, I was wondering if, could we put this as just regular paper as an overhead so that as neighbors come up, they can point? Do you happen to have this with you? Attachment to Exhibit 20? I can hand you this. Okay. And the next one, I have a card here for Karen Busing, but it says that she's relinquishing her time to Tom Mangano. So if I can go ahead and call Tom. Mr. Mangano, you have 6 minutes. Maybe you can. She needs to do that.
I want to take care of some business because I thought I found a lot of errors too. So there's three documents that I think have errors, and that's staff page 7, Tony's letter on March 2nd. March 2nd, and his latest thing where he put it up there to compare his house with my house. You know, a small thing like showing my house at 66 feet when it's really 61, but what's 5 feet? As I put in the letter, the real problem of this is really the fact that the lot is 110 feet wide. Now, we're putting in a cul-de-sac to be the way we can get a second house back there. But the real crux of the whole problem is that the lot is only 110 feet deep. Actually, Los Gatos has really 150 cul-de-sacs. And I've looked through our general plan here. I've looked at Google Earth looking for any cul-de-sac that looks like the Panorama cul-de-sac. And I can't find any. There's less than 10 that have the depth problem that this cul-de-sac has. And there's only one cul-de-sac that really only has 2 lots on one side and the depth problem. And that was created by Highway 85. So it's not a typical cul-de-sac. We'll use Leawood Court. That's sort of a typical cul-de-sac, not only because of the depth, but all the houses fan. As Tony used, they radiate. Each house addresses the house next to it. In the plan you have in front of you, both of those houses don't address anything other than something. They don't address the lot. Again, here it is in a normal pie lot, and then there's Tony's pie. And my mother never cut pie like that, so I don't know what's going on. As I put in my long letter to you guys, and I apologize for that, I think the plan lacks harmony. It obviously kills any view shed that Steffi and I have. I think it's a noise canyon, not all of his making because part of it's already there, but it sure doesn't help it. It's a drainage issue, which we did have a meeting with it today, and someone who talked to us and listened to us in 30 minutes did more than this guy has done in 2 years. And it is a privacy and sound access issue. Here's the harmony thing. One house in back, one house in front, and then all of a sudden you got the end of Panorama Way with 3 lots. Somehow that doesn't harmonize with everything else. This is a density versus intensity thing. When you approach at it from a code viewpoint, he keeps asking, why doesn't this meet density? Well, maybe it's really not density, it's really intensity. And actually, the general plan addresses density and intensity. This is from the general plan, and it gives you 5 things that you should do. You balance the size, limit intensity, encourage basements and cellars. You've never seen that option here. Increase building setbacks as mass and height increase. Tony's put his house 8 feet away from my property line. My house is 9.5 feet from the property line. The average house on Panorama Way is 9.5 feet property line, not 8. So, and Stephanie's is 13 feet. So if he was concerned, one of the mediation things he would do, instead of building a house 24 feet, that's fine, but move it away from an 8-foot property line. There's a little picture that he almost pointed to. This is intensity. When you stand in front of the house, you don't see one house, you see 2 houses. And you see that 2 houses from all 4 sides of the property. You don't see one house. That's all due to this slipping and sliding of lots. That's intensity. Yeah, there's my house. It really is. Again, 61 feet, not 66. But anyway, my house does have whatever he says it is, 1,500. That's whatever. It's not 1,500, but whatever. But you see one house. You don't see 2 houses.
Okay, Mr. Mangano, your time is up. Do I have any questions from the commissioners? Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, actually, Commissioner O'Donnell.
This is the question that I had today when I was out there. Would you, I can look at the drawing, but would you tell me, if you have a side porch, I guess I would call it, and the fence kind of stops so that I guess you could sit there and look out?
Correct.
Okay. And where it is suggested that the house on parcel 2 be located, is it fair to say, well, I don't know, it appears not to be in front of that.
The parcel 2 house is sitting 6 feet behind the plane of my back house.
Okay, but in other words, it's back of the opening in the fence, is that right?
By 6 feet, yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure my memory was.
In my Google search, I've never seen a house that sat 6 feet behind the house next door to it on an 8-foot property line.
Okay.
I can't find one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can I have Mr. Jeff Mitchell? And after Mr. Mitchell, I have a card for Amir, is it Jafari? So if you'll be speaking next.
Jeff Mitchell, 115 Panorama Way. Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks again for the opportunity to come before you. I've submitted my letter from the attorney, numerous supporting documents, and we submitted them early this go-around, so I hope you've all had a chance to review those, and if you have questions, let me know. There's a lot of information. This has been 2 years' worth of discovery. I just want to touch on, during my 3 minutes, a few key points I think that are important to bring up. The town codes, not just these, but the body of town codes exists to prevent what I believe would happen were this to move forward, the squeezing of too many homes into an existing neighborhood without regard for the intensity of the change and the lot configuration and the structural harmony. I think the presence of the homes on Leawood Court has been referenced, but it's not a reasonable cause to approve the proposal based on those houses being squeezed into this size parcel. They definitely have their impacts. They're all going to have view issues, but when it comes to the concept of the impacted neighborhood, as the town council clearly noted in their last meeting, they defined it as Union Avenue and as Panorama Way. There's been historical references to 3 houses being perhaps a compromise between the initial request for 4 and our desire for 2. I think that 4 was clearly a massive deviation. 3 continues to ignore the planning guidelines and the town codes, again, as detailed in my letters to you, and the legal counsel letter as well. And although they've managed to position the lines in a fashion that may meet specific measurement-related criteria, the town codes and planning guidelines, fortunately, are not simply about making numbers fit. They are about compatibility. Again, as a reminder from the town council meeting minutes from December 2009 and February 2010, this act, this remand back, is not an approval of 3 lots in any fashion. There's historical records showing that previous parties interested in this have approached the Planning Commission and been told to do 2. That's all in documents I've submitted. That's in the legal documents that the legal counsel submitted. And I've recently uncovered that the original owner of the property, the family from which Jeff Grant purchased this lot, actually, on record, requested 3. They were denied 3. And they were approved for 2. And I've got that information here. It's taken some time to pull it together. It's kind of the 11th hour, but I have it here for you. So between this and all of the other historical information, between the Cambrian View property to the east that also wanted 3 and is an identical situation on Cambrian View's, the east side is identical to the way this plays out. That one was also told to be 2 subdivision, not 3. If you have any questions, please let me know. And I'll hand this in for your consideration.
Yes, please do that. Commissioner Jensen, do you have any questions?
I have 2 questions, actually. Mr. Mitchell, you just mentioned that you found the documents that you're handing around regarding a denial of 3 and approval of 2. When did that occur, and what was the rationale?
This was back with the father of the property who passed away, and it was inherited by their children. This happened in 1978, and then the Cambrian Way one was in 1990. Although I want to point out that although you could argue that, well, that was then and this is now, the physical properties of this lot have not changed, nor have the physical properties of the homes on Panorama and Union Way.
And I did have a second question, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
No one has yet addressed the question of Mr. Jean's request not to demolish the existing home, which would then result in, as I understand it, construction traffic coming up Panorama. Could you address that, please?
Yeah, I definitely will address it. It may be spoken of as well. But there are great concerns about the number of children that reside on our street on Panorama Way. We know that the process for building this would be directed down Panorama Way and not Union Avenue. And that would be very disruptive for the families that live there, for the children that ride their bikes and play hockey and roller skate and do all those things. But I do believe that there are other people from the neighborhood that will be speaking to that fact.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Jafari? And after Mr. Jafari, I have a card for Cecilia Holmberg.
Hello. My name is Amir Jafari. We are the newest residents of Panorama Way. My wife, our 15-month-old son, and I, we live at 110 Panorama Way. We're neighbors of Tom. To Commissioner Jensen's point, number one, just of the few things that I wanted to point out was traffic and access, specifically for the kids come down Panorama Way anytime. And already, you know, as we've kind of moved in and noticed subtle changes in terms of people who coming down Panorama don't have the same courtesy, nothing specific against anybody, just in general, and I think that'll continue and expand once you guys make your finding. Construction access is the second point I do want to raise in terms of, again, without the demolition of the first house, everything would be down Panorama Way, blockage, specific issues with the Mitchell residents, myself, Tom, and all of the neighbors. Number two, the other issue that I wanted to point, my points are more general, was views on privacy. Some of the things that I've been reading, again, in the limited time I haven't had the luxury of being part of this for as long as it's been going on, are the statements within the submitted documents about the limited limited exposure or in, the blockage that happens to other residences. As Tom's pointed out, as Jeff's pointed out, come down our street, please take a look. The Lot 2 directly blocks the 110 Panorama House, separate from Jeff's, separate from Tom's, the view from our backyard. Not just the view, but also the privacy issues based on the most recent link and renderings that I saw. They would have direct views into our backyard. Again, another big issue for us. The sun access is obviously a big issue too. As I sit here, there's just a few things that I've been reading and I wanted to comment on quickly, and in the interest of time, I'll just read through them. Some of the things that I keep reading about are a little bit, they're between false and questionable in the sense that some of the written proposals, again, stating that there's no impact and the impact is solely on Tom's. I'm here to state that that's absolutely incorrect. Please, you're welcome to come by. You'll see the impact to 110 Panorama Way, not only the other residences, Mike Brown's house next to mine, so on and so forth. Some of the numbers that was presented tonight regarding the blockage that Tom's house has versus this proposal, it's a difference of looking at something directly. My house sits right next to Tom's house. This house would sit literally in our backyards. So even though the numbers might be saying one story, the actual view and footage is a little bit different. The bank loan thing was a little bit questionable too, but I'll skip that. The last item is that I keep reading and hearing about how this was originally denied because of neighborhood compatibility. I personally don't see how this house is compatible. The best way to maybe show it is in terms of, well, it's not here, but in terms of the pie charts that were originally presented where it's ice cubes as they portrayed, and yet at the very last house, it's an awkward shaped pie. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jafari. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Ms. Cecilia Holmberg. And then after Ms. Holmberg, we'll have Mark Grant.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Cecilia Holmberg, and my family lives at 103 Panorama. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. It is unflattering at best and downright offensive at worst for Mr. Jeans to play the wide-eyed ingenue to the committee and claim in his May 20th submission that this project has little to no effect on anyone but Tom and Stephanie. It implies that we're all too dumb to believe our eyes when we see the broad swaths of orange netting around the story poles hulking over Tom's house where the green hillside should be the minute we turn onto our street. And that Tom and Stephanie and the DeBellas and the Mitchells are somehow lying or just whining when they argue that they'll lose vast amounts of their views and or their light, and that a major project proposed for the heart of our neighborhood somehow is none of our business, and that our children's safety over a long period of time is totally irrelevant. And to that fact, Commissioner Jensen's question, my letter of, I believe it was May 6th, did address the traffic concerns. It beautifully illustrates the utter and complete disconnect that's existed since day one and continues to exist between the applicant and the rest of us. For the entire 2-year course of this project to date, it seems like every instruction that the town has given to the applicant has been accepted with nods and okays, and then promptly disregarded, ignored, or garbled. When we say we're concerned about having massive structures peering into our space and blocking our views of the green hills, they say, okay, we'll build higher fences and plant taller trees. When the town says, please work with the neighbors to design a project satisfying to everyone, they say, hey neighbors, here are 2 options, one of which has the thing that you really can't live with, and this one's even worse, but pick one. They hear the words, but whether by accident or by design, they keep missing the point. I am honestly feeling like I live in a nightmare version of Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham, where the applicant is Sam and thinks that if he just keeps pounding us all over the head with the same materially unchanged project time after time after time, we'll all just finally cave in. Except you can't decide that you don't like the taste of and then spit out a project like this that will negatively impact a dozen or more households in very tangible and permanent ways that include potential risk of flooding and significant property devaluation caused by the lost views and added noise pollution. And what about the impermanent but long-term negative impact of a large construction project being routed through our street that would cost our children their liberty to play in their own neighborhood for a couple of years, maybe longer? Except that we don't really know any of these things because they're asking for approval of the entire project without actually submitting plans for the entire project. I think it's also very telling that so many of us neighbors have been involved and outspoken against this project for so long, and no one amongst us has been converted into a supporter in all this time because nothing has changed. We all have families and livelihoods and plenty of obligations that need our insufficient time, yet we've made time, and a lot of it. Just look at all the research and work that Jeff and Tom and John have done for the last 2 years to fight this, because that's how wrong we all unwaveringly feel this project is. Bottom line is, this should be a 2-lot subdivision max, and that's what we can live with. So we earnestly request that the commission again deny the application for a 3-lot subdivision.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Holbrook. Any questions? Okay. The next speaker is Mr. Mark Grant. And after him, I have a card for Robert Gunn.
Good evening, Council. I'm going to go ahead and read this because of the time
And if
limit.
you could please identify yourself, name and address,
I thought I did. I
please.
apologize. I am Mark Grant. I reside at 743 Barcelona in the Fremont area. I'm the brother of Jeff Grant, and I need my glasses. I want to thank, pardon me, I want to thank you for these few moments to speak to you and the folks attending this evening. I've attended all the meetings since the initial proposal of the residential development in 2008. As an owner of real estate, as a owner of a real estate brokerage company in the city of San Francisco and an owner of multiple investment properties throughout the Bay Area, I am very familiar with this process. It has now been over 2 years that the applicant, who is a resident of the city of Los Gatos, has been enduring this lengthy, arduous, and more often than not tedious process. It is my understanding, and apparently planning staff as well, as it's supported in their most recent staff report, that this proposed development meets all of the town's zoning and planning codes and is in full compliance with all state, local, and federal, as well as land use laws of California as it pertains to development of this project. Furthermore, I wish to point out that Jeff Grant has cooperated with the Planning Commission's suggestions to reduce the density from 4 residential parcels to 3. He also compromised on the construction of sidewalks around the cul-de-sac, and still another was to conduct the CEQA study that delayed this process by an additional 5 months. I feel this applicant has met all requests from this body and took all neighborhood concerns to heart. I ask that the Planning Commission and the neighbors recognize that these parcels and their home designs will not only improve the neighborhood, but they will provide family housing and provide tax revenues for the city of Los Gatos. Show the community that government by the people is still working. Please let Mr. Grant complete this project. I ask this body to vote for the approval of this plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Grant. Do I have any questions of Mr. Grant? Okay. Robert Gunn. And after Mr. Gunn, I have a card for Orv Busing.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Robert Gunn. I live at 199 Drakes Bay Avenue in Los Gatos. The reason for my participation in tonight's session is to encourage the Planning Commission to approve Jeff Grant's application. I have no affiliation with Mr. Grant. I was introduced to him 3 weeks ago as a result of my search for new housing in Los Gatos. As a 19-year resident of Los Gatos, I have experienced firsthand the effects of new development in existing neighborhoods and have found the claims against this project to be unfounded and not supported. The house I live in today has similar roots to those that Mr. Grant is planning to build. In 1989, the Los Gatos Planning Commission approved the removal of a house on a 30,000 square foot lot in an established neighborhood with the replacement of 3 new homes. The arguments that were presented against this development were identical to those being used against Mr. Grant. It was neighborhood nonconformity and non-suitability, construction traffic, and safety to neighborhood children. After a 12-month delay imposed by complaining neighbors, the project was finally approved. Upon completion of the project, those that complained the loudest openly embraced the new neighbors, and rightfully so. Not only did the 3 new houses dramatically improve the neighborhood appearance of their 20-year-old neighborhood, they also experienced a $100,000 increase in the value of their homes. This same experience repeated itself again 2 years ago regarding the lot directly across the street from my home. In 2008, this Planning Commission was presented with a plan to tear down and replace a church on a 1.7 acre lot with 7 new homes on 10,000 square foot lots. The neighborhood opposition was the same, as were the arguments. It just happened to be new faces. These neighborhood complaints must come from the same standard playbook. It's lack of neighborhood conformity, increased traffic, safety to the neighborhood children, and loss of privacy. After a year delay, the project was approved. Today, Three of the 7 houses have been completed, and they have been sold, and the neighbors again reached out to embrace their new neighbors. The appearance of the neighborhood improved, the traffic was not adversely impacted, and the new street came with landscaping and new sidewalks. The rodents, consisting of rats, possums, raccoons, that made their home in the church in the neighborhood next to them, all moved out. Living directly across the street from the construction caused little interference to our lives, and in fact, construction became a source of entertainment and fascination for my 2 young kids. The last staff report indicates that the project meets all the application zoning compliance and with the general plan, as well as conforming to land use. Today, these parcels generate a few $1,000s in tax revenue. Upon completion of Mr. Grant's project, the same parcels will generate in excess of $100,000.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Do I have any questions? Okay, thank you very much. So I have Org Busing, and after Mr. Busing is Ian Eshe? Eshe? Eshe, okay.
Good evening. I'm Orv Busing. I reside at 15892 Union Avenue, Los Gatos. My wife and I have lived on this property for 37 years, and we've been residents of the Los Gatos area for over 50 years. We're very proud to have lived in Los Gatos and really like this area. I have a few items that I would like to bring to your attention this evening. First, my wife Karen and I firmly believe that the property before you this evening should be approved for only two parcels and only for single-story homes to keep it compatible with the Union and Panorama neighborhood. The proposed 3-lot, 2-story configuration is not compatible with the neighborhood which has been determined as Panorama Way and Union Avenue. All homes on Panorama are single-story, and all homes with Union Avenue addresses in Los Gatos are single-story. The applicant continues to state that the Leeward Court and Lassoon Court 2-story homes are part of the neighborhood. The minutes, as you've indicated from the Town Council, show that they have determined that Panorama Way and Union Avenue are considered a neighborhood for purposes of this project. Secondly, the applicant has stated that there are only 2 properties directly adjacent that will be impacted with reduction of hillside views. That is not true. Los Gatos residents treasure their views of the hills. Our home is the 2nd lot north on Union. I'd like to show you the impact from this on our particular house. This is a view taken from our standing.
Mr. Busing, can you bring the microphone with
Sorry.
you? Thank you.
This is a view taken standing on our back porch, and this is looking at Lot 2. This is a view taken from our backyard, again looking at Lot 2. As you can see, there's little greenery left. And by the time you add chimneys, and we're not really sure if this is the finished floor height or surface height, depending upon where it's going to go. Thirdly, we do not understand how the Commission could consider a combined site and architecture plan by segmenting the plan with only 2 of the 3 proposed homes. Lot 1 needs to be considered in this proposal. Fourth, there are serious drainage issues in this neighborhood. All homes have sump pumps. Some run 5 months out of the year. The drawings show a bioswale filter system. This design needs to be fully engineered. Mr. Mangano and I met with John Gaylord today and discussed it, and we appreciate it.
So if you could just wrap that up. Okay, Commissioners, do you have any questions for Mr. Busing?
Yes, you said that you met with Mr. Magano and
Mr. Gaylord.
Mr. Gaylord, sorry about that. And what was the conclusion or what came out of that meeting?
And what we discussed, We centered on the fact that there is, in our neighborhood, there's over 20 feet by soil samples of solid clay. So we don't have any percolation. It runs off. So we need, now the design is a bioswale system, which I understand is a relatively new thing compared to what has been installed in prior projects on the neighborhood. The water table in a 1 to 3 inch rain in my side yard, if I were to dig a hole 12 inches deep, I would have standing water as high as 6 inches from the top. Typically, see these bioswales, the homeowners, after they buy it, they look at the bioswale and they say, oh, what a great potential for a planter. So they fill it full of dirt and start planting shrubs and landscaping it. Defeats the purpose. And
I think that answers my question.
Okay, but I guess I'd like to ask Mr. Gaylord how that could be accommodated.
Actually, I wouldn't want a one-on-one conversation occurring at this time, so maybe that is something that you guys can continue further.
I would like for you to, if someone would ask, not me.
Oh, okay, okay.
I'm very satisfied with our meeting today.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Ian Esche. Esche, I'm sorry, I apologize for that. And then after Mr. Esche is John Schwartz.
I have photographs that I'm not asking to be displayed, but if anybody, any of the folks here would like to look at them at their own leisure. First of all, my name is Ian Esche. I live at 107 Panorama Way. The purpose of the photographs is to show the consistency of the neighborhood that is not only Panorama Way, but starts as soon as you come in from Union. We do have a couple two-story houses tossed in there on Ann Way. They are the exception, certainly not the rule. All along in this whole process, my concern, my argument, my point has been the consistency of the neighborhood. Most of the houses built on Panorama Way were built in the mid-'60s. Ours was built in '64, and I think they were all pretty much built about the same time, as was the neighborhood as a whole. Not speaking for Union, and certainly not speaking for Leawood Court. That came later and is a completely different architecture, and I think it always springs eternal hope for other developers that they see what happened on Leawood Court. We're living in dread of that, of course. Another reason why is right very close to us on Taft, on the street of Taft, right off of Blossom Valley Road, which is a very short throw from where we are. A development was built with, from what I understand, absolutely no neighborhood input or complaints or anything else, and it's an abomination. It's completely different from the rest of the neighborhood. That's precisely what we are fearing on Panorama Way. When people talk about the story poles that you see, the orange story poles, it's pretty dramatic. I mean, the only thing that's kind of blocking it to some degree is leaves have finally come up and as spring has come up. But as you walk down, you get to see that the orange story poles are much higher than Mr. Mangano's house and actually approaching the Leawood Court properties, which are on elevated ground. So it's pretty disconcerting because clearly this is not going to be in fitting with the Panorama Way, Ann Way, and the next street over from us, the next several streets over, all the way out to Lee, where these are typical kind of mid-'60s California ranch houses. I have 30 seconds left, but that's pretty much my case.
Commissioners, any questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Esche.
That.
Okay, John Schwartz. And after Mr. Schwartz, I have a card for Lee Quintana.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. My name is John Schwartz, and I live at 104 Panorama Way. Thank you again for taking my testimony and for your patience again with this matter. Two quick things I'd like to say is, of course, we would welcome any new neighbors. I can attest the people on this street in this area are very welcoming, and we would look forward to new neighbors. We know the site may be developed eventually, and anyone in this business knows that cities typically lose money on housing. By the time you provide services, they're not money makers. I'd like to just briefly summarize a couple of points from my May 27th letter, which I think you have in your staff report. Although the flag lot from the prior subdivision has been redrawn slightly, the new subdivision layout is still very similar, as you can see from Mr. Jeans's graphics. And for the same reasons outlined previously, this development is not compatible with the neighborhood. The flag lot was not the only reason for denial. Subdivision finding B, C, and D were all cited by this commission and or the town council. And I think you still have cause under those same findings to deny this version of the subdivision. And as I've said before, that decision is yours, no one else's. My main comment tonight is about the CEQA review. I know we asked for the initial study. I appreciate the staff's time and the consultant's time in preparing it. Mr. Jeans is correct. Initially, we did ask to address the A&S also, but that was not the proposal. The initial study only analyzed the prior version of the subdivision. It states explicitly, and I call this out in my letter to you, that further evaluation will be done when A&S comes back. Now the applicant is seeking A&S for 2 of the lots, but not all of them. A&S and the specifics of the design have never been evaluated under CEQA. Leaving the existing house, which I can't figure out if that's proposed or not, has never been evaluated. How that affects the new homes, that's never been evaluated. It is piecemealing and segmentation under CEQA to only evaluate some of the discretionary actions before you, and that is not legal, and it's not adequate review under CEQA. CEQA and the many legal cases, there's extensive case law on this subject. They're very clear that the analysis must evaluate the, quote, whole of the action, the entire project. Because this has not been done, this is piecemealing, it's not legal environmental review, and the project is still not approvable. I understand the applicant's letter. They ask you to evaluate this project on its merits, and that this project has been arduous and tedious, and I'm sorry, it's been arduous for all of us. But I would encourage you to evaluate this on the merits, because I don't believe there are any merits for the town. This doesn't benefit the town. It's only a short-term benefit for Mr. Grant. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Do I have any questions for Mr. Schwartz? Commissioner O'Donnell?
On the CEQA issue, what is the project here? Is the project here dividing into 3 lots and building 3 homes? Or is the project here dividing into 3 lots and building designed homes for the commission?
I understand there are several approvals and decisions that you have, but for the environmental document purposes, the, quote, project must be all of those things. It must be the subdivision. If the A&S is before you, it needs to be evaluated. The demolition of the existing home or the remaining condition of that home possibly staying there indefinitely. It is also needs to be addressed the phasing of the development. How is this going to play out? Is that existing house going to stay there for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or is it going to be demolished 6 months from now? How the project will be built, I can't make sense of, because I thought the original proposal we have been dealing with in the last hearings was to subdivide the property only. Then now it's become subdivide and A&S on 2 of the parcels only. And like I said, I can't tell whether the demo is proposed or not. But technically, for the environmental review, it needs to be all of the actions before you.
Do I have any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Schwartz. And then our final speaker, this is the last card I have, so if there are any other speakers, I do need you to submit your card before us, is Lee Quintana.
Hi, I'm Lee Quintana, excuse me, 5 Palm Avenue, and I'd like to start by saying that I think this is the first time that I have seen such an involved audience in the last year or 2. Usually there's one speaker or maybe not even any. I'm going to try not to repeat anything that's already been said, so I'm going to gloss over some things and then concentrate on others. It's already been indicated that the council did not say you have to consider just the 3-lot subdivision. The staff report indicates that you have to make a decision on the subdivision tonight under the Streamlining Act. I think this is not a correct interpretation. This is not a new application. This is an application that was remanded back to you to look at a modification of it. Since it went through the appeal process, the Streamlining Act no longer applies. I'd like to talk about consistency with the land use plan, with the general plan, and with the residential design guidelines. As pointed out by, I think it was Mr. Magano, there are several things in the introduction to the general plan that are very significant in the interpretation of the general plan. However, he did leave out one thing which I think is key. In the introduction section, it states, to be considered consistent with the general plan, a project must not only be consistent with the land use plan, it must also further the goals of all elements of the general plan and must meet the intent of those policies. I think there's ample evidence in the record now that that is not the case. As far as consistency with the land use designation, yes, 3 lots is consistent with the land use designation, which would allow 0 through 5 lots. 2 lots would also be consistent with the land use designation. Land use and or zoning are not the only things that need to be considered when approving a project. As far as consistency with the residential design guidelines, the staff states that that's one of the findings you need to make, and that the ANS applications were found to be consistent with the design guidelines as by the architect. In reading the letter from the architect, he deals only with architecture. He did not deal with consistency with character of the neighborhood, consistency with the land use patterns in the neighborhood, or multiple other things. He also defined the neighborhood as Union and Panorama Way.
Thank you, Ms. Quintana. Do I have any questions for Ms. Quintana? Okay, thank you. And so, Mr. Jeans, if you can come back up, you'll have 3 minutes to respond to any of the issues that you heard tonight.
You're being handed a couple of things. One is some conditions that if you want to ask me questions about later, I put up briefly. Secondly, is a document that you received a while ago at an earlier hearing, which is people in the general neighborhood who say that they have no objections to the project. While we're talking about people who have no objections to the project, could anyone here who is either in favor of the project or does not disfavor it, would they please stand up? So people who support the project. Thank you. So there are people here. There are people here in support of the project, and you also have people who are in the neighborhood who have shown previous support. I'm going to talk about a few things. Access, Panorama versus Union. I think it's very unfair on Stephanie Leinert to have 3 years of traffic going backwards and forward. I originally said, yes, let's come in from Union. I think it's up to you to make that decision. It's really traffic coming down past Ms. Leinert's house to build the back ones and then the front one. I think a compromise might be to have a fence and a gate at the end of Panorama and require no parking on Panorama from construction traffic, but I leave that up to you. The Cambrian property, which has always been mentioned as being the property adjacent here that was split and is very similar in nature, is different because they could not get legal lots. They could not get 3 legal lots. Their frontage wasn't right, and it just didn't work. And that's the difference. We can and we do have legal lots in a multitude of configurations, whether you slice it in straight lines and have narrow lots, whether you do a pie or a modified pie. All of those are available to us, even a modified flag lot, if you want to call it, that we originally proposed. So we have so many ways to put 3 lots there that is very different from Cambrian. So I do want you to understand that. Secondly, everyone says there are no 2-story homes. Mr. Escher, I think, said that there are some on Ann Way as you come in, and Mr. Mangana's house next door is a 2-story house. So we're not breaking a pattern here of single-story homes. The immediate neighbors on the north and the south are 2-story homes. So please be aware of that. Yes, I do want to put a 1-story house on Union, and if you want to condition that, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. James. Okay, I'm going to see if I have any questions. Commissioner O'Donnell.
At the moment, I just have one question. You said Mr. Mangani's house is 2 stories?
Yes.
When I looked at it today, it didn't look like 2 stories.
It doesn't, but it is. Okay. And that's why it's 21 and a half feet tall. He has a few hundred square feet upstairs, but it's a 2-story house, and he looks back on Stephanie Leinett's, his office looks back on Stephanie Leinett's backyard.
Thank you.
Do I have any other questions? Commissioner Telesfori.
Can you remind me what the ceiling heights are in lot number 2? The design of that house.
Yes. Downstairs, it's 9'6", and upstairs, it's a 7-foot plate. And then I've sloped the ceilings up in the middle for vaulted ceilings, but it's 7 feet. So what I tried to do was give them slightly taller ceilings downstairs at the cost of a lower plate upstairs, so they average about 16, 17 feet, whatever that is, between the two.
So, just follow up, please. Sure. So, let me put this, how do I put this? Upstairs is 7 feet, but it then goes up higher in the center, is that what you said?
Yes.
And can you tell me why you did that? Since it seems like height might be an issue here with the neighbors that are impacted.
Well, 7 is not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the old homes.
Well, how high does the center go up? Does it go up higher than 9 feet?
I don't think so. Some may. You have the sections.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, some rooms, I would think about 9 in the middle. You know, it's under the roof, so the roof is sloping up. It's designed that way to maximize the volume while still keeping the height down as much as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Do I have any other questions of Mr. James? Okay, that will close our public comment portion of this meeting. We do have a request for a quick break, so I'm going to give us for 5 minutes. This will get us some time to review everything that was just submitted, as well as people, if you can stretch your legs, but do it right outside, so that I plan to start us back up within 5 minutes. So, thanks. Back started. A couple of notes before we move forward. One is clarification from the staff report on the Streamlining Act. We do not have to act on this today, so that has been clarified for us. And I also want our town attorney to just talk a little bit about the CEQA issue that was raised.
Yeah, just to clarify, Mr. Schwartz had raised very succinctly some CEQA issues and used all the proper terminology. But just to point out, what's before you tonight was prepared, the initial study and the CEQA documents prepared on the subdivision, which would be a single-family subdivision, and that contemplates under the general plan and the zoning, a certain building envelope. So that is part of the CEQA document, and actually discussed in there the likelihood of how this would be developed with structures, two-story structures larger than perhaps some in the neighborhood could be developed. So that's all part of the process. So it's not something that was bifurcated, but it's an interesting argument. But in this case, it's certainly contemplated within the initial study and the documents that's before you tonight.
Okay. Commissioner Telesforth, do you have a question regarding this?
I do for our attorney, if I might ask. We were handed an addendum regarding this subdivision, A&S, by Jeff Mitchell, and the documents show the historic application by a previous property owner. Would you please comment on that? I mean, I took a quick read, but I'd like to know how that will impact our decision tonight, or if it will.
Defer to Ms. Davis.
What Mr. Mitchell was pointing out was that there was a previous subdivision proposal on this property by a former owner, and it was proposed at 3 lots. Now, I did look at some of the information, and I haven't been able to look through all that he just submitted. The minutes that I was able to locate didn't give an indication of how it got from 3 to 2. But ultimately, a 2-lot subdivision was approved on this property, but it was never recorded, and the owner didn't go forward with it. So it's not a valid approval any longer, but they're pointing out that historically 2 lots were approved there previously.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioners, we've heard a lot of testimony tonight, and we have a very large weight of documents that we have already reviewed. Couple of things, again, to keep in mind, several applications before us, the first being the subdivision application. And the things to consider under that is, if it is approved, which configuration? There were 2 presented tonight, TM1, TM2. There's also the issue of the reduced right-of-way that was mentioned in the staff report. The deciding body can make the determination for a reduced right-of-way if we choose. And under A&S, there is the demolition that is under question, as well as the timing of that demolition work. And then we do have architecture and site applications for parcels 2 and 3. So as staff had indicated when we began this process, the subdivision it's the first thing. So as we go through comments and deliberations, if you can share your thoughts. Ultimately, if we can reach to a motion, I'd like to have the first motion be on the subdivision itself. Okay? So with that, does anyone want to jump in and share their initial thoughts? Commissioner O'Donnell.
At this point, we heard so much that I did want to just share some thoughts, and I want to hear my fellow commissioners, because it's the third time, I guess, and we've read the transcript of the council. But when I went out there today and I stood on the property on Union, Miss Lynette, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it again, it does appear to me that the 2-story structure on parcel 2 is massive, and it is very close to the property line. So I would, and I believe, when we talk about the requirements to approve the tentative map, one of which is that the proposed map be consistent with the general and specific plans. Now, B says that the design of the improvement of the proposed subdivision is not consistent with the applicable and general plan. And when we look at the general plan and we look at the community design element, there are a couple things there that are very troubling. That is, there's not supposed to be a sudden change in the neighborhood, i.e. going from a lower house to suddenly, particularly when it's right next to it, a big house. So I'm particularly troubled by Lot 2. We don't have ASA application for Lot 1, but Mr. Jeans has said they would be satisfied with a single-story house, which we're not approving how it be laid out or anything else. But I would definitely think, were we to approve this project, we want to condition it on a 1-story house on that front parcel. So that leaves me then to get to what I'll call the third parcel. And it isn't clear to me that a 2-story house would not fit on that one. I'm sensitive that the house on 2 seems to really hit everybody. It isn't as clear to me on 3, so I'll look forward to people's comments on that. So that does get to both ASA and the subdivision map. The other thing I would say about CEQA, and the town attorney has responded to that. I happen to factually, we're supposed to make some facts if we're going to adopt the negative declaration. And it does seem to me the project is the building of 3 homes. Now, you could build less than 3 homes, and I would think the negative declaration would be fine, because it's less than. So I don't have a problem with saying that the the negative declaration as mitigated, in my judgment, would satisfy the requirements of CEQA. I personally need to hear some information from Mr. Gaylord on the drainage issue, because that was brought up, and apparently it's a sensitive subject, and as I understand it, Mr. Gaylord was very good today with the people, and maybe he could explain to us whether he thinks as the conditions recommended would satisfy the issues that were raised. And then on the demolition, I am very troubled by the phased demolition, i.e. putting off the demolition for a couple of years. But on the other hand, Mr. Jean said if you run in the traffic through, you tear the building down and run the traffic in, then maybe that's going to put an unfair burden on Ms. Lynette's property. So I kind of hear what people say. On the other hand, the cul-de-sac is obviously an area where children can play, and Union Avenue, in my judgment, is not an area where small children ought to play. So I just throw that out for consideration. So those are just some thoughts I had, and I'd sure like to hear other people's thoughts on them before I feel comfortable with the various motions on this. So that's my thoughts. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Jensen, would you like to share your thoughts?
Just want to go on a line. I think Commissioner O'Donnell skipped over, to my mind, the initial question that we have to ask, whether 3 lots is appropriate or 2 lots is appropriate. And the town council was very clear that that was our decision to make. And the town council was also, in looking at their comments, it was interesting because Councilman Rice, who sent this back to us, essentially, had very amorphous comments about neighborhood compatibility. And he said he didn't really have a problem with the density. Councilman Wasserman indicated that he wasn't sure whether he thought 3 lots or 2 lots, but it was up to us. Councilwoman Spector didn't say anything. Mayor McNutt didn't say anything. And Councilman Brzezinski was basically concerned with our findings on the Subdivision Map Act, although he didn't offer why our earlier findings were wrong. So, in keeping those in mind, my first issue with the 3 lots versus the 2 lots is in looking at the minutes from our last meeting. I'm looking at the last page and the comments from Ori Korb, who was then our town attorney. And I'm just going to read it. He said, according to our minutes, that it is staff's recommendation that you not approve an A&S application separate from a subdivision application. Town code states that the planning director can approve a permit application for demolition if there's already an approved replacement project, but if there is no approved replacement project, an A&S application is required to get a demolition permit. The sole reason why the demolition is required by the proposed subdivision in this situation is because the subdivision would result in the house straddling the property line, which cannot occur. Based on the facts, the 2 applications should not be separated. So, if we take that, his advice, literally, then we need to see an architecture and site for parcel 1 before we can do a demolition. And to my mind, the projects, Mr. Jeans is shaking his head, but to my mind, the projects have been split by saying that we're essentially, we don't want to demolish parcel 1 until later, and we're not going to give you a site, an architecture and site and design. I think we are splitting the projects. I think we would potentially be putting a project over a property line. And in my discretion, I think we need to see that. Leaving that aside, Mr. Jeans is in the unfortunate position of me living on a street which is highly impacted right now by construction. One person, Ms. Lynott, I'm sorry, but one person being impacted by that is quite different than entire arterials and intersections being shut down by construction trucks. And if you live on a T intersection like I do, where they back around your T, which they would have to do in this situation going down a dead-end street, it's a disaster. And I could not ever in good conscience say that you cannot demolish, you can delay demolishing one house, which might be appropriate to demolish, but which would result in construction traffic going down Panorama Way. To me, that's just absolutely unacceptable. And then just looking for Councilman Brzezinski's benefit, as he said he was going to scrutinize whatever we did here, and regardless of what the ultimate decision is, I suspect that someone's going to appeal. So, to put on the record, I believe that our original 3 findings were valid then and they're valid now. That under Subdivision B of the MAP Act, that the design, and again, that's why we need to see the architecture and site, or improvement of the proposed subdivision is not consistent with the applicable general and specific plans. We've had testimony tonight and in our letters and exhibits that they are not compatible. Mr. Mitchell put up an exhibit tonight, which I addressed that. Mr. Schwartz gave us a letter, which is Exhibit 18 to our packet. Mr. Powell gave us a letter, and Mr. Magano gave us a letter, all of which contained inconsistencies with portions of our general plan and our design guidelines with respect to this property and project. I think they're all valid. Mr. Gunn stood up and said that he believes that neighbors have a playbook for opposing these projects. Indeed, they do. It is the general plan and the residential design guidelines, so it's no surprise that when there's opposition, the opposition sounds the same, because our town policy are designed to promote neighborhood compatibility, they're designed to promote harmonious development, and they're designed to promote, and we spend a lot of time as a planning commission listening to concerns of single neighbors about how a view might be affected versus an entire street. And it wasn't surprising to me that the neighbors that didn't object lived across the street or away from the development. So I wasn't particularly persuaded by that. The second reason that we couldn't make the finding was that the site was not physically suitable for the type of development. We haven't had a lot of information on the drainage. We did have before. We know it's an issue. That would indicate its problem. It's also interesting in terms of the site that there has to be different configurations to try to get these houses in, which is another indication why there should be 2 and not 3, because if you have to gerrymander a lot line, you probably shouldn't be putting another house there. Which brings me to our finding on subdivision D of the MAP Act, that the site is not physically suitable for the proposed density of the development. And that is indicated by what I just said. That's also indicated by the fact that one of the houses needs to be 8 feet from the property line of neighboring property, that there are staggered property lines, as I indicated. And Mr. Mitchell put up tonight when he spoke a portion of our town code, which was 29.20.160 subdivision A, which indicated that the deciding body, which would be us in this case, may enforce reasonable requirements more stringent than minimum zone requirements when it's necessary to achieve compatibility with the neighborhood. So even though density can be at 0 to 5, if we were to determine that 3 or 2, something more stringent than what's indicated is okay, is necessary to achieve compatibility and to match the property, then we are free to do that, and I would argue that we should. Also, the fact that the bank would only loan on 2 versus 3 is sort of interesting. That's sort of an outside third party thinking that maybe 2 lots is appropriate. So those are my thoughts. I don't think, and I say this for the benefit of the council who's going to be reviewing this, which is why I'm being so long-winded. I apologize. The direction we got was not a lot of direction. I do think there ought to be more scrutiny given to whether new information is in fact new, or it was indeed available for the 2 years that a project was under consideration. So I hope the town council will consider that when they reconsider this, as I'm sure they ultimately will. Let's see. And I should go back to the demolition for a minute. We did not receive any justification from Mr. Jeans for the proposed timing of the demolition and the nature of the demolition other than economic. And personally, based on the other testimony, I don't think that that's sufficient for the delay given the town policy and the impact it would have on the street. So those are my preliminary thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. And I appreciate the thoroughness. It is very clear from the direction that we've gotten from our council when this was remanded back to us that we need to be as crystal clear and as focused and tight as we can with the basis for which we are making our decisions. So I know that I certainly appreciate that. Okay. Commissioner Erickson, we're going down the line.
Okay. So I will not repeat everything the 2 commissioners to my left have said in the interest of time, but let me highlight about 3 or 4 things real quickly. I think while there's been a lot of discussion between whether there should be 2 lots or 3 lots, it seems like to me that's not the question with the subdivision part of this, because the question is, can we approve a 3-lot subdivision? It would be presumptuous for us, in my opinion, to talk about whether it should be 2 or 3, because the applicant chose to submit an application for 3. So that's really the issue. Whether a 2-lot subdivision would be preferable, that would be determined at the time if that was ever submitted. I would be comfortable, as Commissioner O'Donnell indicated, with the secret findings, with the negative declaration, with the mitigation measures that are laid out, so that's fine with me. I'm not as comfortable with with finding of the basis that we could approve, because I'm not convinced, at least I need to understand about the drainage issue before I could conclude whether or not the parcels were physically suitable for development. That seems to me a missing piece of information, which I do not have at this point in time. I also have concerns about whether the density criteria can be met with the way parcels 2 and 3 seem to me to be almost squeezed into the site, in the same kind of concern that Commissioner O'Donnell expressed about the second parcel and its closeness to Mr. Mangano's property, and then how they sit on the site. So I'm not convinced at this point in time that I could not conclude that they met the density.
Thank you, Commissioner Erickson. I'm going to real quickly turn to Mr. Gaylord, our engineer. There were 2 issues. There were 2 commissioners who brought up the drainage issues, and I know that is something that is of significant concern to the neighbors. So, Mr. Gaylord, if you would just mind sharing with us the discussion that you did have today with the neighbors, and in your opinion, with the proposal in front of us, does the drainage issue, is that mitigated?
Yeah, the discussion we had this morning, and one of the helpful things that we had when we actually sat down was a full-size set of plans to be able to really look at how the project is proposed to be designed. Currently, the project kind of sheet flows just in the northeastern direction, and it kind of just drifts onto the lots, and there's history of drainage issues in the lots to the north. What the design does is it puts in drainage swales, drainage facilities, adds on the Union side, piping, inlets, et cetera, to make the situation much better. There is an issue in the area, and what we need to make sure is that this project does not make that issue worse, and that it does what it can to make that issue better. And I think there's 2 concerns by the neighborhood. One is surface flows, and 2 is subsurface flows. When we sat down and we kind of explained how the design was set up, the surface flow concern was lessened, I think, when they understood exactly how the site was to be designed. We have gone through and put in an additional condition, and Mr. Jeans provided that somewhat in his conditions, but basically the driveways on the northern side of the property would be required to have a curb or other drainage, concrete or something permanent facility to make sure that the drainage was directed out to the public frontage and was not allowed to drift downhill onto the northern properties. So from a surface standpoint, this should be much improved from the existing condition. From the subsurface standpoint, that's where the last condition that Mr. Jeans put in his, one of the concerns was the, whether you call them rain gardens, biofilter, however that's done. Traditionally, a lot of those things use infiltration. Basically, the water is perked back into the ground. Based on the soil types and the concerns of subsurface drainage, we put a condition in there that would not be a suitable means for filtering this water. So there are other means. You can import material in these rain gardens, sandy, loamy material that basically filters the water when it comes through, and then there's sub-drains that actually pick the water back up and direct it to the drainage facilities. So with those 2 additional conditions, I think the project, this area will be much improved from where it is today. So I don't think the drainage concerns will be mitigated or will be much better based on the development.
Thank you for that. And before I turn to Commissioner Telesfori for her comments. Are there any specific questions for Mr. Gaylord based on the drainage issue? Okay. Okay, Commissioner Telesfori, would you like to share your thoughts with us?
Oh, thank you. There's many. I will say that the proposal did offer some change, and we thank you for that. However, there were not any major concessions or compromises, I thought, that really addressed neighbors' concerns or our concerns as well. You know, this is a very tedious project, and because of the fact that it's a uniquely difficult project, it's a piece of land sandwiched between a single-story neighborhood and a newer single-story neighborhood on Union Avenue. So we have Panorama and then Union, and then we have this piece of land. So I did visit the site today and saw the site both from Ms. Linett's yard and also from Mr. Magnano's house and from the street on the other side. So it was, let's see, let me finish what I wanted to say. So if we take a long time with this, it's because we do care enough. And so you have to understand this, so bear with us. Anyway, the configuration and the geometry layout of this land really makes it not a normal subdivision. It's a long, narrow lot, and it's fronted by two different streets, is what I can see. Perfect, I suppose, for two lots, although that's not what we're here to decide tonight. I suppose, is that the interpretation for my fellow commissioners?
I know that we have a proposal for 3 lots. What my comments were intended to suggest was that we could certainly, for the same reason we rejected the design previously, or the subdivision previously, rejected tonight previously for the same reasons.
Okay. So I just would, and then in reviewing the residential design guidelines, I can't see where Lot 2 addresses any of them or incorporates any of them. Visiting Lot 2 today with the story poles, I mean, a picture's worth 1,000 words. It was an abrupt change of elevation. It was, I was stunned, actually, and that we haven't even filled in the hard part. Another view that I saw today, and I was stunned at that, was the photograph that was up on the, and I forgot who put it up, but it was of the 2 homes on Panorama Way on the cul there, that showed one almost directly behind the other. That was really an eye-opening to me. What it's telling me is that there's too much development here. Massing, the ceiling heights, 9 feet on the first floor, I think Mr. Jean said, but lot number 2 has ceiling heights going from 7 feet on up to maybe, I don't even know what it is, I forgot what we said, but anyway, higher than 7.6, which would be to code. So I think what we need to do here is really, consider the design. I think what we're trying to do as a commission is to identify what the issues are. Let's get this off center and let's get this going. I don't think anyone in this room wants to halt any development, but I think we want to manage it. And it really behooves us to spend this time with it. Let's see, what else did I want to mention? My other commissioners really addressed so many of the other issues. As far as the CEQA, I would agree with them as well. I think that we just have to pay attention when we design these homes, that we reduce the square footages of the second floor. I mean, there's so much you can do with roof lines. I'm not going to go into it. I don't want to be designing anything. But I think what's there now isn't working. We're all having trouble with it. So that's my comment for right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Telesfori. I don't want to echo a lot of what has been said today, but I do want to just make my comments also put on the record. Of the 7 findings, we have to find at least one of those. And as I've said in previous meeting, finding A, which basically consistency with the applicable general and specific plans, the picture that I look at the most when reviewing this documentation is Exhibit 20, when it has the layout of the lots within that immediate neighborhood. And without looking at the details, without looking at the architecture, when you just look at how those lots are sliced, I mean, if you're looking at the community design element in our general plan that talks about harmonizing it within the neighborhood, and it talks about the scale and the rhythm, I just based the proposal in front of us, the last iteration as well as the two that are before us, and see how that specific proposal fits in with the rhythm of that overall pattern. And I just can't see it. And so I look at community design elements, all the elements, general policies contained within our general plan, and I also look at our residential design guidelines, which specify really what your immediate neighborhood is. I know our town council has also talked about that when they were looking at it, but if you look at page 11, it really specifies it's 2 to the left, to the right, and those across the street from you. In this particular case, because it's at the end of the cul-de-sac, you don't have that, but as you're driving down Panorama Way, and then on the other side on Union Way, I'm looking at what is the rhythm and the pattern as you're driving down that neighborhood. And again, without looking at the architecture, just looking at how those lots are broken up, there's no consistency and harmony on my part when I look at that. So those are the specifics that I want to put on record. It sounds like we've heard from all the commissioners now. I'm going to look to you guys and see if there's anyone that wants to throw out a motion to just get the ball started.
Before we get to a motion, we got to listen to each other, which was good, and I've got to think about what people have said too. But we've talked about, this has gone on for 2 years, and I'm not attributing fault to anybody, but that is a long time, and to perhaps help it not to go on indefinitely, I do think we have to be clear. And to me, the very first issue is this could this or does this comply with the requirements for 3 lots? Because whether you have 2 lots or 3 lots, you're going to have the question of, well, what do the houses look like? And I don't care whether this is 2 or 3. If they're going to build that house that the story polls show next to Ms. Lynette's house, I would not approve that. I think that it doesn't comport with the community design element. Right. So that to me then is not a question of 2 versus 3. It's how do things fit? So then I say, well, wait a minute. How would 3 lots be? If the 3 lots were all 1 story, would that work? If the 3 lots were 2 1-story and 1 3-story, would that work? Well, certainly in my mind, it could work if it were 3 1-stories. So then it's really not a question of 3 versus 2. Would it also work if, I think it's lot number 3, the one that we really haven't hit very much because there's nobody here talking about that. So it's possible that you could even put a 2-story house in, 2 singles and that. Now, we have an opportunity here tonight, one, to say, under the tentative map approval, what is it of these findings A through G that we would say it's not consistent or whatever. I don't think, Exhibit 20 is a blank piece of black marking showing the lot, and that doesn't tell me a lot. If you say that every subdivision map has to look on that basis like everything in the neighborhood, I wouldn't agree with that. I don't have any trouble with B, though. B says the design or improvement of the proposed subdivision is not consistent, and I have real problems with the design as presently constituted. So when one of the council people say, you got to be clear on that, well, let me be clear. I don't think B is satisfied with the present design. The other ones are a little more Ouija board to me, and you could probably go anywhere. It is somewhat subjective. It says that the site is not physically suitable. Well, as I just said, I think you might be able to get 3 lots in this, given what the design would be. I don't know. So, but I feel strongly that B is not satisfied. I would not argue with any of my fellow commissioners who think there are others, and that's fine. But when the council considers this, because I have a feeling this will be appealed, I'd at least like them to address why they would think that the design or improvement of the proposed subdivision is consistent with the applicable general plan when we have called their attention to community design element. So whatever else we do, I don't think we talked about that much last time. Now, on the point that was raised on Ori Korb, I pulled that out and looked at it, and I have a different interpretation of that, if I can find it, which I think we ought to really get the town attorney to speak to. I just had this thing in my hand. Commissioner Jensen, do you have that handy? Because it is a matter of understanding what he said, and I will grant you that at this point it's susceptible to more than one reading. But he says, staff's recommendation that you not approve an A&S application separate from a subdivision application. Well, we wouldn't be doing that tonight. We have two A&S applications. Part of the problem here is we're not supposed to demolish a building and leave it blank and then go and do things and then maybe not get it built. We're approving the actual construction of two buildings, two residences, to replace one. So from a policy standpoint, there would not be a reduction in housing in the area. And it says, town code states that the planning director can approve a permit application for demolition if there is already an approved replacement project. Well, that's what we're being asked to do, approve this replacement project. Now, you can read that to mean the project insofar only as it speaks to the one lot where the house is. I don't read it that way, and I don't read the comment that way. But if there is no approved replacement project, an A&S application is required to get a demolition permit. So if there is no approved replacement project, and I think there is, then it says you have to have an A&S application. Therefore, I don't think you need an A&S application for parcel 1. And I'll obviously defer to council on that question, because I think it's a very important question that Commissioner Jensen raises. And this is the sole reason why demolition is required by the proposed subdivision in this situation, is because the subdivision would result in the house straddling the property line, which cannot occur. So if we say tear the house down, it's not going to straddle any property line. So it's a chicken and egg problem. If you can't approve the demolition, yes, it will straddle. If you can approve and require it, it doesn't straddle. So I would like some clarification on that from the town attorney. But let me see, because everybody said a lot of things here. Where we're going, and I'd be very shocked if this isn't before, well, I think it will be before the town council. But I believe under the proper circumstances, I could approve 3 lots. I could approve 3 lots, particularly if there were 2 single families, and I don't know about the double. But I didn't hear much evidence tonight on why it wasn't okay. So let me see, what else did we talk about? The drainage problem, I'm satisfied that what Mr. Gaylord has said and the new requirements they've added to the conditions would satisfy that problem, so I no longer think that's an issue. And then as far as gerrymandering to get this, you know, anytime you do a subdivision map, you can call that gerrymandering, because you're moving things around. If you, on the other hand, say, gee whiz, there's no practical way to get 3 lots in here, fine. Then it isn't that it's gerrymandered, it just doesn't work. And I think to that extent, one could say that. Based on the evidence I have before me, I wouldn't say that. I believe that, I think it's TM2 would work, but I would not approve the project with the 2-story house as it presently is. So part of that was the same thing Commissioner Jensen is saying. The council has said, we didn't necessarily agree with what you did, we didn't understand what you were saying, and so there is going to be this record, and they're not going to see unanimous council. That's the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. One thing that you said that I'd like to ask staff a question of real quick. This is unusual in that we have architecture and site before us when we have the subdivision. Usually when we have this much detail, it's more of a plan development. So the question I have for staff is that an option that the applicant has ever considered, so that the entire package would be reviewed, and we get into these issues of, well, 3 single-family homes that are 1-story are more appropriate, and vice versa. It seems like that might be a better way to look at this property than what's before us.
We actually discussed that very early on when the applicant was looking at doing 4 lots. And it didn't seem advantageous to do a plan development because the objective was to try to get a fully conforming subdivision. And he didn't need any concessions to code if he wasn't going to propose a private street or smaller lot sizes than the minimum required or reduced setbacks or anything of that type. So there wasn't a real need to do a plan development, and that's why they moved forward initially with the subdivision. And I think they felt that adding the architecture and site applications was the way to go to show that the lots were appropriate and how the houses would or wouldn't fit into the neighborhood.
Could I make a...
Yes, and I'm going to ask the town attorney to make a comment.
Thank you.
Okay.
And let me make a comment that hopefully will help the commission, make a decision tonight and give council their best advice. If I had my way, the A through G on page 4 you'll never see again. You should not read those things. They're not important. And the reason they're not important is because what they say is if you find one of these, you shall deny the subdivision. Okay? You have loads of creativity and authority above that. In other words, you don't have to find one of those to deny a subdivision. You can deny a subdivision because you don't like it. And you have to articulate why. So, and the reason I say it so strongly is just to maybe be a little provocative, but what the town council would probably like to know, and probably the applicant in the neighborhood too, is there any basis upon which you would agree on a 3-lot subdivision, or is there no basis, and what are the reasons? So in other words, I'll just give you some examples. Some of the things I heard tonight was squeezing the house into a setback with an 8-foot setback, or it's too high. Is it single-story homes that would get you there? Is it bigger setbacks? Is it, things like that? And when you focus on this list, you tend to start looking at broad, nebulous concepts like general plan, conformity, and things like that, when land use planning really boils down to common sense. In other words, if this is this big and is this close, it's going to be massive. So in making your findings, you might want to have that discussion among yourselves, saying, I could go 3 lots if these things changed. With respect to the question that was raised by Commissioner Jensen and O'Donnell, I think Commissioner Jensen's comments may lead her to a point for her view that she doesn't know that first of all, the applicant's asking not to be required, I think, to demolish the house, the existing house. You can say no to that, and you can say no to that for a variety of reasons, and then you can also condition the subdivision, if you were to do 3 lots, to say, and you can't record the final map until you have an approved ANS. So that's one way out of that. But if you're never going to get to 3 lots, then you don't have to worry about that it is a denial.
Could I just follow up? Because
Go ahead.
we have a comment, which we read. If you'd like a copy of it, I can borrow Commissioner Jensen's copy of here, what was said. Well, I can't find mine, and it's possible the town attorney doesn't have it in front of him. Maybe he does.
I have it right here.
Okay, good. I'm trying to find out what he means. So telling me what I can do is great. But if he says, if his interpretation, if what he said is, as Commissioner Jensen says, that's one thing and that's significant. If, on the other hand, what I said is correct, that is some other implication. So I think it's nice that you're telling us all kinds of things we could do, but I'm simply asking you, what does he mean? What does it mean, what it says this year? Don't tell me what I can do. Yeah. Tell me what it means.
Maybe, staff was there. I'm not sure I can make a legal interpretation of a derivation that may capture all the words and may not. My understanding from staff is that their interpretation per the town code is that the criteria for granting a demolition permit is to make sure that one of the things is to make sure that the housing stock is replenished, and there's 2 ANS approved as part of this. Is that correct?
Partially, yes. The town code says that if you are just proposing a demolition with no replacement structure, then you do need to have architecture and site approval. Period.
But is that the case here? Aren't we? We have 2 before us, right?
Right. You have, and one of the findings for a demolition of a single-family residence is maintaining the housing stock. And you are correct that instead of 1 house, now you are getting.
Thank you.
2 houses.
Commissioner Jensen.
So, a couple of comments. With all due respect to the town attorney, I don't see how he could possibly advise us that we could ignore the State Subdivision Map Act, which says that we shall deny a subdivision, which after all is what's being requested here, if one of the 7 items listed in A through G is something that we make a finding about. Yes, we could be creative, but it is, we shall follow the state law and deny the subdivision application, which is what we have before us, if we make one of these findings. And so with respect, I don't understand your comment. And Commissioner O'Donnell, you're confusing me with your comments, because at the same time, I'm certainly not saying in my comments that I'm demanding 2 houses or I'm demanding anything else. I'm simply saying that based on the evidence we had before us previously, based on the evidence that was provided to the town council, based on the evidence that has been provided to us tonight, that a 3-lot subdivision is not appropriate, because, as you said yourself, among other things, we cannot make the finding under the Tentative Map Act, letter B, that the design or improvement of the proposed subdivision is not consistent with the applicable general plan and specific plans. Once you concede, as you have, that you can't make that finding, then you cannot approve the subdivision, whether it be 3, 8, 5, 10, 15, 20, 2, 1. You cannot do it under the law as we have in front of us. Now, we can go over and above and decide why we don't like it, but once we find one of these, then we can't. And unless I just absolutely can't read, I don't understand the town attorney's interpretation of that. That's what I understand him to be saying, and Mr. O'Donnell, with due respect, is not the town attorney, but what I understand you to be saying is that you want us to ignore these points because if we have some other reason we don't like it, that we can do that. But if we find one of these points, then am I just out to lunch when I say that as I read this, if we make one of these findings, that's the end?
That's exactly correct. I was really saying don't get bogged down in this level of analysis, meaning certainly if you find one of those, the MAP Act says, and you shall follow it, that says you shall deny the subdivision if it doesn't meet that. What I was saying, when you go through that as part of your analysis, when you're trying to decide what you can agree on and what you can advise the town council, it's not very helpful if the subdivision's dead. So if you can agree on that some subdivision there, a 3-lot subdivision, could work under certain circumstances, you don't worry about these. These are mandatory, but that's not the typical analysis you go through in a subdivision.
Okay, so thank you. My assumption is that then I make finding B. Commissioner O'Donnell has already said that he makes finding B, so I think that there's no other analysis, because I think that is not the obligation of the Planning Commission to find a way to approve an application. That's not our job. Our job is to exercise our discretion in reviewing applications that come before us, and if, as we previously determined, the application does not merit approval, then we deny it, which is what we did before, and which is what I would propose we do tonight.
Before I turn to Commissioner O'Donnell, one thing I would like to remind commissioners is one of the options before us is to approve the subdivision as proposed in front of us, yet deny the architecture and site applications. And so if I'm hearing the town attorney correctly, I've been hearing that some people think 3 may work, but the design that is currently designed for parcels 2 and 3 are not appropriate. If a different design were put in place, then perhaps the 3 might work. But that's something that we don't have in front of us, so it's hard to make that decision. I've heard that in different formats from different commissioners. And so one of the things I want to see is to try and move this forward, because we do know it's going to get appealed. Is it possible to try and come with some parameters that we agree on so that it is crystal clear what are those parameters that we would like to see in the next iteration, whether it comes before the commission or the council? Some suggestion was 3 single-story homes. I mean, if there were certain caveats put on this subdivision, would that be more appropriate and likable to some of our commissioners? Commissioner Telesfori, and then Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yes. I mean, I could do that. I think that would be appropriate, but that we could give some caveats to doing that, to approving it. I'm thinking, though, that once we deny it, based on if all of us agree on B, under tentative map approval. Is that moving it ahead? Do you know what I mean? I wonder if we, and yet I'm afraid to move it, approve it without seeing what the architecture looks like. I mean, I don't know how, we can't condition something about the designs coming back to us, I guess.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell, and then I have a come up.
If we said, we can't approve your design, and therefore we can't approve the tentative map, but, and I don't know if we can do this, if you can condition the approval on 3 one-story buildings, deny the architectural site approval and say, come back with your architectural site approval for the 3 single stories, or 2 single stories and 1 double story, whatever. I don't see why you couldn't approve the subdivision map subject to that condition. Now, they could say, we don't want that, and they appeal it, and they go where they're going to do. And then I think the town attorney's also told us, I think the town council has said, what do you folks really think? And I would also agree that it's nice to know that we believe, certainly Commissioner Jensen and I believe strongly, that B is not satisfied now. But does that mean it could never be satisfied? Well, no, I don't think either one of us is saying that. And if we have some suggestions on what we think it would take, and further, if we could actually condition an approval tonight, then when it goes up on appeal, maybe, I don't know, maybe the town council would say, well, you know, we kind of agree with their condition, except that we don't want 2 single stories and 1 double. We want 3 single stories, or you know, something like that. So I guess I've got an implicit question to the town attorney there. That's a pretty substantial condition to say, yeah, we could do 3 lots. That's not, we could approve that subdivision, but we don't approve the architectural site approval, and you'll have to come back on that one. At least, from our standpoint, we were told the applicant, you can have 3 lots, but here's our condition. They may say, too bad, we don't want to do that. Or the council may say, we're going to modify your decision. So I'm asking you if we can do that.
Well, I think you can. I think maybe you defer to staff that another alternative might be to continue the matter and bring it back with that if you knew discreetly what you wanted to see. Primarily because if you're conditioned to 1 story, the question is, if you were to approve the subdivision, the tentative map, that's an approval subject to appeal. And it could be that the lots don't work at that point to get a footprint big enough for 1 story. So I'll defer to the planning folks to see if they prefer to see it as a continuance.
But one thing, obviously you can build 3 single-family homes on 3 lots. When you say it may not be, that's a developer's problem. Developers always say, well, heck, if it's 1 story, it's got to be virtually the same square footage as it was when it was 2 stories. Well, that's not my problem. I don't know how they solve it. And obviously, maybe they get fewer square feet. Again, that's not my problem. So I don't see any inherent problem in that. And I'm thinking, to move this thing along, I don't know if it does anybody any good to keep this thing before us. The town council will then have the ability to say, well, we agree with the planning commission that B, they had to do that under B. But we don't agree with A, B, and C, and maybe they can then come up and tell everybody in a final thing whether they think that we're nuts when we say 3 single families or 2 single families and a 2-story.
Well, maybe answering it differently is are you suggesting, because one of the things you could do is if you came to 3 lots and conditioned it that they be 2 1-stories and 1 2-story. Clearly, you can do that. You would be denying the A&S and conditioning the project on the subdivision to be 2 1-stories and 1 2-story. And that could go forward with, again, with some more guidance from the commission as to what you'd like to see in those lots in terms of setbacks or heights.
Or you could, if the subdivision was approved in some form, you can continue the A&S applications for the new homes and specifically ask for a redesign.
All I'm saying on that, I don't blame us at all. I don't blame anybody. But this has gone on for 2 years or whatever. It does cost a lot of money to do all this. I would like to see resolution for the homeowner standpoint. I'd like to see resolution from the developer standpoint. And to have them redesign this thing and then take it back to us, I don't know what the council's going to approve. If we can get this up to them as a vehicle to move it along, and then they can say, personally, if, for example, we took the lowest common denominator for a 3-lot subdivision and said 3 single families, then they could say no. 3 is not. Single family is not enough. I didn't mean single family. I mean 1 story. They could say no. We can give them 1 2-story on parcel 3. They can do anything they want to. But if a majority of the commissioners tonight felt that some of us don't, that you could get 3 lots here, let's find out. If we say no way, then let's do 2. Say condition on 2 lots.
Okay, before I go to Commissioner Telesforo, thank you for that, Commissioner O'Donnell. I do want to say that I don't believe continuing it is going to move us forward. I think we have to decide yes or no tonight. I think when we decide yes or no, we state all the reasons why, and by stating that and giving those parameters, in essence, that will move it forward so that if it is appealed, those are the considerations the council will take into account if they decide to overturn or if they decide to continue, to refuse the appeal. So, again, as much detail as possible. It sounds like right now there's agreement on B of the findings. All it takes is 1. We've heard from our different commissioners, the basis so far from what they believe in. And so from the rest of us, I'd like to hear, are you in agreement that B? Would you like to add on any more? But at the very least, I'd like to hear your comments on whether or not the proposal as is, does it meet any of the findings on page 4?
Okay. Well, first of all, I actually kind of like the idea coming from staff about seeing this come back if we should decide that this could be 3-lot subdivision, because in that way, if we did approve it at that point, it was what we wanted, given as our directions would be, and then we were to forward that to council, it would be something concrete, and everybody would know what we were talking about. But it doesn't sound like that's going to be supported here. But I don't know. And then looking at the tentative map approval, I would also think that this proposal, I think we might be able to make the finding that the site's not physically suitable for the proposed density of this development, given what I've heard from my fellow commissioners. But maybe I could hear more about that. So 2 comments, I don't know.
Okay, Commissioner Erickson?
I believe I could join in making the finding that B would preclude approving of this, and I guess I would also, at this point, be able to make a finding D that is not physically suitable for the proposed density of the project, because it seems to me the fundamental issue is the lot being proposed to be subdivided is narrow, and it's too narrow to put 2 lots on either end of the property, it seems like to me, because the footprint of the houses is it would be my measurement of density, not whether they're single-story or 2-story. And so I can't imagine that if one were to require all single-story houses, that the footprint of a single-story house would be smaller than the footprint of a 2-story house, that the developer would ever propose that, because I can't imagine that they would propose that, because I can't imagine that would be economically feasible for the owner of the property to do. So I think the juxtaposition of the 2 proposed lots in either TM1 or TM2 create too great of a density, and so unless I could be convinced that the footprints would be reduced for those, not the height, but the footprint, then I don't think that I think I would be able to make the finding that it was too dense for the property. And I think it's just because it's too narrow.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Find out where we are. If, on the other hand, you made a motion and said that you would approve this conditioned on that there not being 3 lots, but that there be 2 lots, and that one lot would be open onto Union, and one lot would open onto Panorama, and that you're going to deny the architectural site approvals, because obviously if you're going to have 2 of these. I guess I'm just wondering, is there a way to move this along such that whoever has the strongest concerns, we can satisfy them? It may not be what, I might be more aggressive on this than you. On the other hand, I certainly couldn't say having 2 here is a bad idea. Clearly, if you were to have 2, then I couldn't approve the ASA, but I sure could, then I could make then I wouldn't have to make the finding of B, in which case we could approve the subdivision map. So I just throw that out to Commissioner Erickson, because while my statement may have appeared to be in disagreement with you, I want it clear that I'm not fundamentally in disagreement such that we're going to be benefited by sending this back for anything. We're just going to go round and around and around.
Given everyone's comments, and I agree with the chair that by taking a specific action on this, we move it forward. I've heard Commissioner O'Donnell, Commissioner Jensen, I believe the chair, I believe Commissioner Erickson and Commissioner Talasore indicate that the Tentative Map Act, Subdivision B, this is positive, negative wording, so it's very odd that if we make any of these findings, the application must be denied. Everyone has said that they can make finding number B, or letter B, that the design or improvement of the proposed subdivision is not consistent with the applicable general and specific plans. And everyone has been very specific, cited different sections. We've had exhibits we've referred to. We've had letters we've referred to with respect to that. I've heard at least, well, I believe Commissioner Talasore and Commissioner Erickson indicate that they can also make finding D regarding the density. I could also make that finding. I'm not sure from what Commissioner O'Donnell said whether he is of the same mind, but in an effort to move this forward, my motion would be to deny the application for the subdivision based on the fact that the Commission makes the findings under B and D of the Tentative Map Act such that the subdivision is not appropriate and reach no further.
Okay, so we do have a motion. Do I have a second? Okay, I'm going to second the motion, and let's just see where it goes, okay? So I'll call it. All those in favor of the motion, we specifically highlighted B and D of the tentative map. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So that is, I believe that is 3. And all those opposed? Okay, we have 2. So it is denied, 3-2. Okay. Okay, so I'm sorry. So now that that is taken care of, we need to move on to architecture and site applications. So there's 3 before. No? Okay. So then, okay.
You can provide, assuming this would go up on appeal, you can provide the council with any insights you have, but once the subdivision is denied, we really don't have any place to put the lots.
Okay. Are there any appeal rights that you need to cite?
Yes, there are appeal rights within 10 days.
This decision is appealable to the town council. There is an appeal form available in the town clerk's office, and there is a fee for filing an appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
Okay, that wraps up agenda item number 2. We do, I'm looking to the staff if there is any staff report for tonight.
There is no report tonight.
Okay, and then commissioners, anything under commission matters? Okay, very good. Okay, so tonight's meeting is adjourned. Thank you.